All right, and we're back again. And this is another of one of my history paper readings from my junior year of high school. And this one is covering the time period between 1843 and 1930. And this one is called End of an Empire. All right, let me get started. What were the chances of a former colony defeating one of the few European superpowers that had the strength to invade and almost conquer England in 1588? What were the chances of a former colony defeating the European power that had financed the explorers credited with its own discovery? What were the chances of the United States of America defeating the Spanish Empire in 1898 and crippling it to the point that it would be reduced to a nation of the fourth class? The Spanish-American War, fought in 1898, and its impact. The Spanish-American War was fought in 1898, and its impact shaped the world. By the year 1898, the Spanish Empire was deteriorating. It was no longer the mighty world power it had once been. Its empire was in disarray and falling apart. Most of its colonies in South America and Central America had fought and earned their independence, and its Pacific colonies were following the same path. The Caribbean island of Cuba also desired liberation from Spanish oppression, resulting in a rebellion from 1868 to 1878, and a subsequent rebellion in 1895. The Spanish Empire sent General Valeriano Weyler to the colony to maintain order there, and he soon gained the nickname the Butcher on account of his harsh techniques for maintaining order. His actions against the people of Cuba were noticed by the Americans to the north, and their opinions on how to address the situation were manifold. Historians find it hard to agree on the cause behind why America involved itself and later went to war with the Spanish Empire, but one factor cannot be overlooked. But one factor that cannot be overlooked was sensationalism used by the media. Sensationalism can be defined as presenting of facts or stories in a way that is intended to produce strong feelings of shock, anger, or excitement. And this is exactly what two journalists, Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst, used in their efforts. There's a typo here. I'm trying to figure out what I was intending to say here, but it is a really egregious typo. Anyways, but so I'll just abridge what I guess that says there. Used for their respective newspapers, essentially. And back to the reading. William Randolph Hearst was the son of a Californian millionaire who obtained the San Francisco Examiner to satisfy a gambling debt, and later purchased the New York Journal in 1895. During his career, he hired famous writers such as Stephen Crane and Jack London to boost the success of his companies. Joseph Pulitzer was an Austro-Hungarian immigrant who started off working as a mule driver before being recruited by Karl Schurz to write for a German-language daily. He stood in favor of prohibition and against gambling, using the St. Louis Post and Dispatch as a means of communicating his thoughts to the populace, and later acquired the New York World. These ambitious men became competitive rivals as their companies became more respected by the American people, and the tension within the country about what to do about the Spanish Empire and Cuba were seen by both men as a means to outdo one another. Both men tried to sell more paper copies than the other by stirring public opinion towards war with the Spanish Empire. For more copies to be sold, Both men tried to sell more paper copies than each other by stirring public opinion towards war with the Spanish Empire for more copies to be sold in wartime. The entire competition between these two men culminates with Hearst sending a hired artist, Frederick Remington, to Cuba to illustrate pictures and provide battle sketches, even though America and the Spanish Empire were at peace. One source describes the following event thus: when Remington arrived in Cuba, he cabled back to Hearst that there was no war to illustrate it. "You furnish the pictures," Hearst wired. "I'll furnish the war." In Havana, on February 15, 1898, the American battleship USS Maine sank in territory occupied by the Spanish Empire, killing 260 Americans. And upon hearing the news, the American people and the American Congress wanted to retaliate. I'm going to raise my window, actually. Just in time, too. There's something flying around outside the car here. All right. And back to the reading. With war brewing in Cuba to the south, Commodore George Dewey of the American Navy was given an explicit task: capture or destroy the Spanish fleet. His exploits would lead to the annihilation of the Spanish Empire's navy and the capture of the Philippine Islands in the name of the United States of America. 10 days after the USS Maine was sunk in Havana, Theodore Roosevelt, who was at the time the Secretary of the Navy, ordered the United States Asiatic Squadron to Hong Kong on high alert. The squadron consisted of 7 ships, protected cruisers USS Olympia, USS Boston, USS Raleigh, and USS Baltimore, gunboats USS Concord and USS Petrel, and armed revenue cutter USS Hugh McCulloch. They were aided by 2 British supply steamers that were purchased in Hong Kong. On April 25, 1898, America declared war on the Spanish Empire, and Commodore Dewey set out to claim Manila, Philippines, for his country. The Spanish fleet was anchored in Manila Bay under Rear Admiral Patricio Pasaron and consisted of 7 ships, protected cruisers Isla de Cuba and Isla de Luzon, cruiser Reina Cristina, gunboats Don Juan de Austria, Don Antonio de Ulloa, I don't know how it's pronounced, and Marquez or Marquis del Duero. The 7th ship, an old wooden steamer that had been, the 7th ship, an old wooden steamer that had to be towed into the battle, was Castilla, not to mention the shore battery of 6 guns near Cavite. Arriving near Luzon Island on April 30th, 1898, Dewey prepared the Asiatic Squadron for battle early the following morning. One source describes the beginning of the engagement, later to be known as the Battle of Manila Bay, thus: when Dewey first sighted the Spanish fleet to the south, he ordered his supply ships, USS Hugh McCulloch, he ordered his supply ships and the USS McCulloch out into the bay, and advanced in column with the USS Olympia, USS Baltimore, USS Raleigh, USS Petrel, USS Concord, and USS Boston at 400 yards, 366-meter intervals. Around 5:40 a.m., when he was within 5,500 yards, roughly 5,000 meters, of the Spanish force, Dewey issued a command to Captain Charles Gridley of the USS Olympia. "You may fire when you are ready, Gridley." As the battle raged on, the American ships slowly maneuvered closer to the Spanish fleet, and by the end of the battle, the Asiatic Squadron were positioned about 2,000 yards away from the enemy ships. At 7:30 a.m., Dewey and the American ships had withdrawn and were having breakfast before returning to battle. The rest of the battle is described by one source as follows: before he re-engaged at 11:16 a.m., the Reina Cristina and Castilla had broken into flames. Thus, the remainder of the action consisted of silencing the shore batteries at Cavite and completing the destruction and demoralization of the smaller Spanish ships, a task that passed to the USS Petrel. Dewey took possession of Cavite and paroled its garrison and awaited the arrival of a land force to capture Manila. The Asiatic Squadron of the United States of America defeated the Spanish Empire at sea, with only 7 Americans slightly wounded and suffering no casualties whatsoever, compared to the 167 enemy sailors killed in battle and the 214 wounded out of the original Spanish force of 1,875 anchored in Manila Bay. The Manila Bay Battle and other similar engagements in the Spanish-American War, as the conflict generated over Cuba was named, not only secured the liberation of Cuba from Spanish oppression, it established the United States of America as a global world power. As a world power. My bad, yo. As a world power capable of not only going toe-to-toe with, but dramatically defeating a European power. After the capture of Cuba by American forces, a Spanish captain on board the ship Theresa lamented to the Spanish admiral Pascual Cervera. "Poor Spain," he said. The Spanish Empire, which had been in existence since 1533, had finally reached its end. It was no longer a world power, leading American Lieutenant John J. Pershing to quip that it had become reduced to a nation of the 4th class. Its role in world politics had been recast, and the United States of America, the former colony, had taken its place. All right, and that is the paper. And thank you for listening. Yeah, thank you for listening.